Hello, hello, everyone. How are you all today? I'm going to put me back on gallery so I can, oh, no, where is it? There we go. Gallery. There we go. So I can see most of you. Hi, I'm Hattie Voelcker. I'm running this workshop today and on looking down, I know this, on cultivating trust and safety for your clients. So before we get started, you'll have heard, and I've got to do it too, you'll have heard that little notification about this session being recorded. That's because we're recording it for people who weren't able to make it, because obviously it's a very specific time and day. So whilst I want to encourage you to share as much as possible, do be aware that we are recording it and it will be put on the internet. It'll be shared on YouTube. So just be aware of that when you come back into the main room to share. The breakout rooms, on the other hand, will not be recorded. So as long as you stick to my general rules of being kind in those spaces, you can say what you like. And obviously, actually, the more you do say and the more open you are, the more people will get from those spaces. So welcome, welcome, welcome. This is, I got assigned this one, and I think I know why, but I love this area. And I think it can be, as I said in the little summary, I think it can sometimes be overlooked, because I think sometimes as coaches, we think, well, we're really good at doing this. This is why we've trained as coaches. People always come to us for advice and to talk to us because we're really good at creating that space. I was probably one of the odd ones out in the fact that I don't think I thought I was any good at that, and I don't think I thought that people would trust me, but turns out they do. Go figure. But I do think it's one of those ones that we underestimate. We underestimate sometimes our limitations in this area. So what I wanted to do today was explore, one, the reason this is in the core competencies, why this is so important, and two, what can get in the way of us really leaning into this as a competency that can not only help our clients, but actually help us be the best coaches we can be, free us up to be even better coaches than the natural coaches we all tend to be. And so that's what I'm hoping you'll take away, and to take away some ideas of how you can use this cultivating trust and safety to develop a space that is even more productive for your clients, and a space in which you can develop your coaching and develop what I think Nick sometimes calls that inner self-supervisor, so that we keep growing as coaches and keep creating better and better spaces for our clients. So let me go back to my schedule of what I was going to do. So the first bit I'd like to talk about is the purpose and function of this. Now, I don't know, I'm going to put the link to the core competencies, because these are the updated core competencies. So in the chat box, I've put the link to the core competencies, so you can have it up on your screen if you want to. And I'm going to go over. So if I look over to the side, I'm just looking at my second screen, but it's quite a long way away. So sometimes I look a bit weird because I'm all the way over there. If I go down, so the definition is partners with the client to create a safe, supportive environment that allows the client to share freely, maintains a relationship of mutual respect and trust. And under that is list 6 different ways in which the ICF recommend you do this, and ask for you to do this if you become accredited with the ICF. And so what I wanted to do was take a look at those, take a look at that initial definition and how each of those 6 subcategories help you do that. Because one of the most important words, and it comes up again and again in the ICF core competencies, is that word partners. And for me, that's an incredibly important word. So I'm going to ask Kat to help me now and break you all into breakout rooms. And again, I'll repeat that those won't be recorded, to talk about what you feel is the purpose and function of this particular core competency, and also how you feel each of the 6 subsections of it help you achieve that for your clients. So we'll be breaking you into groups of sort of 3 to 4. So there's no pressure. You don't feel like you have to say anything. Feel you can go away and be an observer. But obviously, the more you share, the more you'll get from those spaces. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes to go and have a chat. So what did people come up with in terms of the purpose and function and how the 6 subsections, don't make life easy for myself, do I? Help you achieve that? You can either stick notes in the chat box or stick your little blue hand up or your physical hand up, and I will see if I can make sure I can see people. The trouble is some of you are on page 2, so I won't necessarily see you, but if you put your little blue hand up, then you come right to the top of my screen. So what do you think is the purpose and function of this? The client feels seen and heard. Yes, absolutely. And Mark, yeah.
Can you see me? Can you hear me? Cool. And we ended up, well, first of all, what was helpful for us was just to kind of find out where we are each at on our coaching journey and setting up our coaching businesses and how much practice experience we had to reflect on to answer these questions. But the thing we ended up in most conversation about was the number 6. Can you read that out for me, please?
Yes, I just moved something, but demonstrates openness and transparency as a way to display vulnerability and build trust with the client.
Yeah, so we got into a conversation about, because all of us are either in training, just qualified, or just setting up our businesses. So that's kind of where we're at. So we had quite a bit of a conversation around that idea of how vulnerable we might make ourselves to a client. And I guess to what extent that's professionally appropriate in terms of disclosure, and whether there's an element of, I think some people talk about an element of like collusion with a client or judgment. And I was kind of offering that I think it's okay to kind of acknowledge to a client that you can relate to what they're saying without necessarily doing a massive self-disclosure, but doing that in a way to kind of show that you genuinely have empathy with them, and to maybe, if they have put themselves in a position where they're making themselves very vulnerable and open to you, that you kind of acknowledge that and thank them for that, and kind of acknowledge that might be for some people quite difficult or quite brave, and that you really value them, that they're willing to kind of, put themselves to that degree of openness with you. That was our conversation.
I love that. And it's interesting that you picked out number 6, because for me, when I was going through them again, I was thinking, actually, for me, I almost work from 6 back upwards, because that's where I think the core of this competency comes from. And it is an interesting idea, because there is that fear of oversharing, and that fear of bringing too much of yourself. And there are those that teach coaching that say you shouldn't bring of yourself you shouldn't bring yourself into the coaching space. And Kat will know that, and some others of you who know me know, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, that's rubbish, because as soon as you sit in the space, you've brought yourself. You've brought your thoughts, you've brought your questions. So there's no way you can't bring yourself to the space. The difference for me, and this is where the line is your agenda. And actually, if you read the old competencies, sticking to the client's agenda comes back again and again. I think it does in the new competencies. But it's all about what your agenda is for sharing. what your agenda is for bringing of yourself. Now, if your agenda is to tell this wonderful story because you think it's really entertaining, that's not going to serve your client. Well, it might, but it's not going to be the best way of serving your client. If your agenda is, well, that triggered something in me, I want to share, then you have to ask yourself the question, is this serving the client? If your agenda is, as you said, that's really interesting, that resonates with me, I had this experience, I wonder how that sits with you, does that relate to what you're saying? Then that's a way of giving them permission. And as you say, that idea of it was okay for you to be vulnerable in that moment. It was okay because, look, I can be vulnerable here too. And I think that's really powerful. I'm just looking at some of the chat comments. So as Lorne said, safe to share their world and understanding of it. So that ties in with what we've just been saying. Seeing the coachee as person-centered and accepting them as how they present to ensure they are able to be vulnerable and make change in the moment. Absolutely. The client is creative, resourceful, and whole, and treating the client that way, that unconditional positive regard. And in some ways, if we look at all of these 6 ideas, they talk about it's really respecting the client, where they're at, and seeing them as no better, no worse, getting rid of the hierarchy, that idea that we're the expert. We're not the expert. We are an expert, but so are they. They're the experts on them in many ways. They're the ones who know most about how they feel, even if they can't necessarily access it. And there are other things, but they are experts in so many ways. What else did people come up with in those breakout rooms? Be brave. What thoughts did you come up with? Matt.
Hi there. Really sorry. I was in Mark's group as well, so I feel like our group is getting all the airtime. We didn't talk about this in the group, but another thought that I had was really around supporting the client to believe and have faith in their own thoughts, feelings, abilities. There's something in there. Number 3, the client's unique talents, insights, and work in the process. If somebody might not have that self-belief, but in that space with the coach, I'm just wondering, is there a role for us to almost kind of like big people up and help instill faith in their own thoughts and abilities? I don't know.
That's a really interesting point. And so, this is all the idea of positive psychology and how do we bring positive psychology to the space. The difficulty is with that is when we big them up, then we're almost taking for those of you who've done TA, we're taking the nurturing parent role. And that idea of it takes me to encourage you. The way I like to do it is find a way for them to big themselves up. How did it feel when you achieved that? What did you get from that? Sort of to in a sense, those challenging questions that make them acknowledge what they've achieved, I think is much, much more powerful. And I use, as you can tell, an awful lot of humor and lightheartedness. If somebody says something, it's like, oh, because last week you said you weren't going to be able to do that. So how does that feel? And challenging them in that sort of way, I think can be really, really rewarding for them. So acknowledges and respects the client's unique talents, insights, and work in the coaching process. For me, when I read that again and went over it, I was thinking that sort of challenges me, because I think it's really important for us to be able to do that, but have them in the driving seat. Claire.
Yeah, one thing we were kind of debating in our group was the competency. I can't remember which number it is, but then it talks about sort of adapting your style or something like that. Like, what's the word? Hang on. Would be helpful if I said the actual words. Oh yes, demonstrates respect for the client's identity, perceptions, style and language, and adapts one's coaching to the client. We just had a little debate about how much we flex our style. because a lot of us are still kind of developing that, probably, if we're new coaches, kind of working out what that style is. And then, you know, when you're then perhaps marketing yourself or putting your message out there, you might be alluding to, this is my style of coaching, or this is kind of how I like to work. So we just kind of weren't sure where to place that, if you see what I mean. So how much do you adapt and how much do you go, well, this is kind of my style, and if you don't like it, I'm not the right coach for you, kind of thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that starts to play in with why I like this competency and why I think this is actually one of the more challenging competencies, because actually it's that idea. And sometimes I talk when I'm doing RPGs or mentoring about this idea that we're not static as coaches. The idea that we have one style, again, I think is rubbish, because we might have a tendency towards one style, but how I coach will depend on so many factors. Whether it's sunny outside, what I had for breakfast, how much sleep I had last night, the previous conversation I had, what was the last book I read, who's in the room with me, what breakfast did they have, what side of the bed did they get out of? And all of those are influencing factors as to how I coach in any one session. And so I can be a different coach for the same client each time I see them. At the center, there'll be similarities, but it changes. And I think one of the most important things for us as coaches is to be aware of that, to be aware of where we're at, to be aware of what is influencing us, what might be influencing the client, and going, hold on, you know, I have this sort of bubbly, energetic style generally, but if someone comes in and something horrible has happened in their world, I'm unlikely to be like this in that space. Not necessarily because I consciously choose to be something else, but I go, I'm really empathetic with them and going, hold on, I'm sitting in this space with you and I want to be here with you, accepting you where you're at right now. I often quote a joke where somebody stops and asks directions and the reply comes, well, if I were you, I wouldn't be starting from here, which is kind of like, I think it's great for coaching, because the point is you are starting from here. Whether that's here, you're a new coach and you don't have as many tools in your belt as perhaps a more experienced coach has, or as many experiences under your belt as experienced coaches have, or whether it's your client, you start where they're at, wherever that may be. And I think for me, that's what adapting your style is about. It's about being really open to who's in the space. And yes, there will be people I attract because of the sort of coaching I do, the type of people I generally work with, and the sort of personality I have and how I am. But when they're in the space, there are so many different ways that I change. And that's okay. I think it's our awareness of where we're at and where they're at that help us be better coaches, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to people? Okay. So did anybody else come up with anything else about this competency? So I think you started to see my approach to this competency. And this can start to play in with some of the challenges about this, because one of the biggest things, if you see with all of those 6 subsections, it's talking about understanding the client and their context and their identity, environment, et cetera, their language, acknowledging and respecting their talents, looking at the client, and respecting them. And that idea that they are perfect and whole. And that's what I love about coaching and why I became a coach, not a therapist. That idea of you are good enough as you are, exactly as you are. And I think one of the things that gets in the way of us truly digging into this competency is the assumptions we make. The assumptions we make about who they are, the assumptions we make about what they're doing, sometimes even the judgments we make. And one of the things that I go deeply into when I'm supervising is identifying not only our clients' assumptions, but our own assumptions. One of the biggest blockers to coaching really well is when we buy into the client's paradigm. And it was really interesting. I saw this a lot at the beginning of lockdown. People would say, I'm really, really struggling with lockdown. And the coach would go, yeah, absolutely. They might not even use those words, but it's that idea of we believe that we are sharing the experience. Now, yes, to some extent we are, but how they are struggling with lockdown might be completely different to how we're struggling with lockdown. And if we just assume that it's the same, we don't ask the questions. And it's starting to really dig into that helps us cultivate trust and safety, because actually, if you go, I'd like to understand more about your struggles, it opens up these lines where somebody gets this chance to be heard. And as much as it's nice to be understood, actually, I think more than that, we want to be heard. Because unless we're truly heard, we can't be truly understood. So the next part of this workshop is to have a think about some of the challenges that will stop us being the best coach, stop us cultivating trust and safety. And actually, I wrote down, for me, the real purpose and function of this competency is for the client to feel totally accepted in the space. So what gets in the way of us applying all of these subsections and enabling the client to feel fully accepted in the space? So we're going to take another 10 minutes out for you to have a chat about that. And then we'll come back in the space to talk about it and pick it apart, as we do as coaches. All right, enjoy. So people are making their way back. Wait till... there we go. Boom, 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 boom. So how did you get on with this section? What did people come up with as to challenges for us achieving, cultivating trust and safety? Again, you can put it in the chat box. Oh, there we go. Claire.
So we had an interesting discussion, and this is quite specific to like the times we're in, of having coaching sessions on Zoom versus in like a cafe or something like that. So we were talking about particularly about presence and how we potentially find it easier to be present in a Zoom setting rather than in a cafe where there's other stuff going on like around us. And I've definitely had sessions in both and found like the background hubbub more distracting from me being present. And then we also started to talk about the client being able to open up. And again, this is just from a personal experience with one particular client where we've met in a cafe and we've done it on Zoom, we've done both. And she's more able to express herself when she's on Zoom because she's in her home. And obviously there's more psychological safety of getting emotional. Whereas if we were out in a cafe, perhaps some reservations around that. So we were just kind of talking about the difference, and it's just very interesting in these times of virtual coaching versus face-to-face coaching. So yeah, that was just one thing that we were talking about.
Yeah, I think the environment is really hugely important. And I think as you get more experienced as a coach, you tend to not coach in cafes and things. And I certainly coached in cafes in the very early days of my coaching. And I think now I know I'm not going to do that because somebody can't open up. Although I have had in these Zoom days, people being in cafes when I've been coaching them, that's their choice. You know, there's a limit to what we can do about that. So yeah, absolutely, the environment. And I think Zoom's really interesting because certainly in group coaching, one of the really interesting things I've found is you can really look at people and they don't know you're looking at them. So as a coach, it can be fascinating to look at the group dynamic and really dig into what's going on in that dynamic, because they don't feel like they're being so watched. But even on a one-to-one level, absolutely. What other challenges did people find and talk about? Matt, yeah.
One that we discussed was as a human being, our own unmet needs creeping into the room. So if I have at my core a need to be liked, you know, there's a question there about how might that influence the questions I ask or the things that I say in the room or the way I behave.
Yeah, absolutely. Our own unmet needs or our own triggers that crop up. I think that's a really, really interesting one. And sometimes that shows up in terms of our desire to achieve outcomes for the client and our desire to come across as the expert in the space. Caroline, what were you going to say?
What's in the client's own mind, their own belief that they are being judged, or they're judging themselves through what they imagine other people are saying about them, and not being able to believe that you as the coach are not bringing judgments.
Yeah, and how can we influence then that? So that's another external factor that we can make choices around. I mean, we can't directly change how they assume, but what can we do as coaches in those circumstances?
So for me, it's about sort of hearing the assumptions they're making and drawing out some themes, asking questions about why they think that, where's that coming from, what's telling them that, asking what other people might think in the same situation. So trying different lenses, as well as the reassuring, you know, that this is a safe space. I come believing that you are whole and creative. So repeating those messages and hoping the more they hear them, the more they start to absorb it. And also seeing no judgment. Seeing no judgment and receiving no judgment. But it's helping them turn off that voice, which is that I'm judging me and therefore you must be.
Yeah, and I think that idea of noticing it and naming it is really, really useful, because that's a way in itself, the fact that you're noticing it and naming it is showing that it's something that is not necessarily an assumption to be made. So again, we're challenging their assumptions that they're going to be judged. So what is making you feel like you're going to be judged in this circumstance? You know, how often do you feel judged? Where in your life do you feel judged? When was the first time you remember doing all those horizontal and vertical comparisons? And yeah, so Kat, you talked about being not attached to the outcome of the conversations. And I think that it goes back to what Matt was saying in terms of meeting our own needs. When we try and achieve an outcome for our clients, who are we doing it for, really? What's the reason we try and achieve outcomes for our clients? Because sometimes, I certainly know for me, it was about proving I was a good enough coach. If I didn't achieve an outcome, that meant I wasn't a good enough coach. Therefore, achieving an outcome was a tick in the box. I must be okay. But that's my shit. Excuse my language. You know, that's my stuff I'm bringing to the party. It's not about them. It's also, sorry, who's achieving the outcome here? Where does the power lie? If you're achieving an outcome for your client, you're not empowering them, you're disempowering them, because it's all about you. And that can often make them feel less worthy and less safe in the space, or more dependent, which actually has that kind of element of feeling slightly edgy in the space, because then they might try and please you. And it might be that they put you on the pedestal. Need to add value because we're being paid. Absolutely, earn our money. But as I like to say, the less I do, the more I get paid. And the more I get paid, the less I do, because actually it's about them in the space. And I'm there to facilitate. And that's how I earn my money, by creating this space. The genius of the coach, I think, is exactly this. And this is why I think it's one of the most important competencies. It's creating that space, because if you create that space, everything comes from that. If you create that space, you start, you've got presence. If you're in that space, if you've created trust and safety, then presence follows from that. You know, the idea of agreements start to follow, because you know what they, I hate using the word need, you know what's important for them to have in that. Mark?
I didn't know I'd actually triggered my hand, but I had. So we were talking about the kind of the preparedness of yourself when you're going into the coaching session, and the things that might be disabling us from having enough time to prepare. Or for me, I was saying about now that I'm kind of restarting my coaching, and I've got my first client, and I've seen him a couple of times, seen him again next week, and I've noticed both first two sessions, my internal narrative around self-doubt and kind of questioning my competence and my ability, and having to, you know, really kind of quite well notice it and shift it, so that I don't go into the session with that mindset. Yeah, so that was kind of what we were talking about, and you know, the kind of preparedness, things that get in the way of that, and then how we present when we arrive, and then how that can frustrate the session and the trust and safety, I suppose.
And that's really interesting, Mark, because that taps into really what I wanted to share with you all today. Because for me, one of the fundamental and most, how am I going to put this? Most important features relates to one of the biggest challenges, because we're talking about creating trust and safety for our clients in the space. Now, I don't believe we can do that unless we feel that we are safe and we trust ourselves in the space. And for me, one of the biggest things that throws off a coaching space is our lack of trust in our own abilities, our own selves. And when we don't feel safe in the space, and often that's because of our own attacks on ourselves. And actually, so for me, if we look at this idea, let's start with the fundamental thing. We've got to earn our money. We've got to be the expert. We've got to bring something to the space. We have to do this. We have to do that. All of those have tos. I call these words smog words, you know, should, must, ought, got. There's have to and need, but schmong sounds wrong. They're words of obligation and shame. They put us on edge. They make us feel like we're going to fail, or we have the potential to fail, which makes us feel unsafe. And we're not accepting ourselves. And if we can't accept ourselves, then we're demonstrating to our clients lack of acceptance. And this relates to this number 6, you know, that idea of being able to be vulnerable in the space in accordance with our client's agenda for their, you know, to help them with their stuff, not for our own agenda. But if we can demonstrate vulnerability, then we're giving them permission to demonstrate that vulnerability. If we can develop trust and safety for ourselves, then there are all sorts of neurological reasons, you know, mirror neurons, etc., etc. That means we encourage our clients to feel safe and trusted in the space. Sandy.
I just want to say in this context that there are other pressures on us as well. You know, we have to get the client to declare outcomes that they want for the session. They also have to declare takeaways. And that's part of the rules, if you like, in order to gain our diploma, in order to be ICF certified and so on. So there is a certain amount of pressure that in my own experience can stop me 100% relaxing into things, because these are essential things, and that is part of becoming a coach. And I'm sure it gets easier as you practice it more. But, you know, in the first 40 sessions, it is not easy to relax totally. And I don't know if it impacts the client, but as we're talking here, I'm thinking this must do, but we can't take that pressure off of ourselves either. So it's almost a double bind.
That's a really interesting, and I'd never seen it that way, but I totally understand and accept what you're saying. My thoughts about that is it's how you perceive that. Because you can say, I have to do this to be a coach. Well, one, you don't. If you want to be ICF certified, yes. It's one of the things they ask you to do. So that's why I think these workshops that Animas have run are really useful, because what I'm doing here in terms of setting outcomes and things, what's the purpose of that? What's the reason behind it? If you're just following it because it's a rule, then I would question whether it's right for you to be an ICF certified coach. Because really, I look at those, and I came at this, excuse my language, arse about face. Anyway, I did, well, these are the rules, these are what I have to follow. But the more I spent time as an ICF mentor, the more I spent time unpicking both the old competencies and the new competencies, the more I go, no, this makes sense. I don't do this to because I have to tick the box, set an outcome. What I do it for is I know that if my client has gone, what I'd like to achieve from this session is X, we are 1,000 times more likely to achieve something for them. It's that simple. And if X is to really have had a chance to have thought about this, that's an outcome. And where, you know, then we look at, you go deeper down the rabbit warren of ICF, you know, what are their success criteria? How do they know they've had that deep thought? If you do that, what will be different? If you've had a chance to really think about this, what will be different for you? How will you know that you've thought about it enough? And then they say, well, because I feel like I've whatever it is. And then you're starting to unpick what they want to do, the reason they want to do, and then you get an idea of where it is they want to be. And I think sometimes we look at outcomes and think they have to be something really concrete, something really grow or smart or something like that. They can be, but they don't have to be. And it's up to you to choose whether you think this will help you. And, you know, I'm ICF accredited. I can't say that every single time I will look to accountability and goals. It depends where my client is in the space. But I would say 95% of the time I do, because I have discovered it works for me. It is a useful tool. So as opposed to a stick with which I beat myself, and again, another reason to doubt myself and not cultivate trust and safety for myself, I use it as a tool in my belt. I choose to use it as something that will help me. And that's what I do with all the competencies. In a sense, I've gone through them all and I've made them my own. And I've asked, is this something I want to do? And if it is something I want to do, what's the reason I want to do? And how can this help me? And I've decided I want to do this, and I've given reasons. I'll use an analogy with singers because I work with singers. You know, a singer can sing a song, and unless they really connect with the words of that song, they won't connect with their audience. And if they're trying to connect with how a certain singer sang it and they want to mimic them, they'll only get it if they believe the same thing as that singer did. But really the best way is to connect with it and decide what you mean by those words. Because one line in a song can mean so many different things depending on the volume you sing it at, the intonation, the high point, the stress in the sentence, all of these things. So make these core competencies your own if you want to use them. Dig into them like this. This is why this is not an instruction manual of how to use this competency. This is an exploration on how you could use it, because it's make them your own. Now let me have a look at these things. A good example of demonstrating vulnerability. So for me, a good example of demonstrating vulnerability is to be okay when you ask a question that doesn't land in the way you want it to land. You know, because actually those can be the most interesting questions. They can tell you more than questions that have a huge answer to them and have an aha moment. It's like, that didn't land. But to be okay with saying something that doesn't go down well, or to get things wrong, you know, I'm wondering if this means this to you. No, it doesn't. Oh, okay, cool. That own acceptance of our own imperfection, because that's empowering. What we don't actually connect with perfection. We don't trust perfection, to be quite honest. There's something deeply suspicious about perfection, or we feel inadequate in the presence of perfection. What we do connect with is humanity. So when I talk about vulnerability, I'm also talking about our own humanity. When Kat will vouch for this, when I'm mentoring and supervising, I'll be like, yeah, no, I got that wrong. Or, yes, you're right, I missed that. And that's okay. So the outcome could be more awareness for the client. Absolutely. And if that's more awareness, and what would more awareness give you? If more awareness is what you want, what would that give you? And the more you dig into this, the more you're unpicking their motives that they may never have unpicked for themselves. So actually digging into an outcome is one of the best ways of coaching, because you're really getting to is like, I want this. Okay, what's the reason you want this? Because I want that. Okay, what's the reason you want that? And the more you dig into it, the more you take off the layers of the onion to find what it is that's really at the core of why they're with you. A useful question I've asked a client is, what do they know now they didn't know an hour ago? When there isn't a particular outcome, just better clarity. Absolutely, I like that, Melanie, really do. Brené Brown's Power of Vulnerability, and yes, Gifts of Imperfection, talking about perfection. I love her book, Gifts of Imperfection. One of the questions that the ICF will encourage you to ask is, what have you learnt from today's session, from what you've talked about today? And I find that really useful because it's this idea of you'll always have learned something. You might, when we talk about takeaways, sometimes that I used to always use the term, what are you going to take away? But sometimes that actually limits you. And if you do learnings and then actions, it's what have you learned? And on the basis of what you've learned, what do you want to go and do? You can see the forward movement of there. There's the whole thought, and then, okay, now let's move it forward. Now let me check on time. I've probably gone way over time. I've lost, there we go. Saying to Kat, I'm terribly ADHD, and I'm just starting to realize this. So let me focus. We're all good, actually. So now what I would love you to have a think about is what you want to, let's put this into practice. What have you learned from what we've talked about? And if I'm being quite specific, how would you like to go out and create new and deeper ways of cultivating trust and safety with your clients? So again, I'm going to give you 10 minutes to think about what you've taken from, what you've learned from this session, and how you want to implement that with cultivating trust and safety for your clients. Okay, do your stuff, Kat. So it really is over to you now. What do you think you have learned from the discussions we've had today? And what are you going to go away and do? Read this competency. Sandy.
I'm going to go through all the core competencies and really seriously see how I can own each one and write notes, not even see a client, just look at it and how can I embody this in a way that I can actually find meaningful. Yeah. Thank you.
Wonderful. Fab. Thanks, Sandy. Who else? Yes, Harris.
Yeah, for me, it's the last part about accepting yourself, because if you don't accept yourself, you don't feel unsafe. It wouldn't be safe for the client. And so what I'm going to do is before session is saying that I am enough, and that's better than perfect. So that's
wonderful. And you can hopefully start to see how, if you are aware enough of the assumptions you're making, and you're starting to notice those and starting to notice when you don't feel enough and when you don't feel safe, then that's wonderful, because not only can you become a better coach from being able to see that, but actually you can work on yourself, and you can go, okay, here's some stuff I could do with sorting. I will say one of the biggest triggers I had was if I came against a compliant child in the space, I was totally triggered into critical parent, and I'd watch myself. First of all, I wasn't aware of it. Then I became aware of it. Then I thought, okay, well, I'm aware of it. It won't happen. And then I would watch myself be triggered and go, what? Yeah, stop. And then I found a supervisor, and I did some work with my supervisor about it. And then I realized how it related to my personal life and how it was going on in my personal life. And now compliant child triggers me less. I'm getting there. And that's okay. And it's okay. Awareness is the most important thing. So be more aware of how to hold space more sensitively, checking in with coaches periodically, knowing situations, acceptance can change, letting go of the need to show up as perfect. Yeah, if there's a need to show up in any form, it's actually is beautifully imperfect, because it's that acceptance of imperfect, because actually imperfect is human. We've got robots, we've got computers that perfect things, and it's their perfection that's off. I like to use the analogy of the tightrope walker. We don't look at the tightrope walker with any great awe if they're walking on the ground. The whole point is they're amazing because they're doing this in the sky, and there is the potential for them to fall off. That's what we connect with. We connect with vulnerability. We're excited by vulnerability. And the other analogy I use is slightly Freudian, because it's of the egg. That idea that the shell is the stuff we dye our hair pink, we wear lipstick, we have nice glasses. Well, I think they're nice anyway. And we do all of that. And that's what we show the outside world. And then the white is our neuroses, our hang-ups. And that's what our dear families and friends get to see. And, I used to be a criminal barrister, and I would say, actually, the more damage and hurt people have suffered, the more negative experiences they've had in life, the thicker their white. But no matter how thick the white, inside everybody is a yolk of absolute pure gold. And that is our most vulnerable part of us, but the most beautiful part of us. And it's when we are able as coaches to be vulnerable enough to show that gold, to cut through all of our insecurities and show that gold. It's the same for singers and performers. I say, show your gold. That then our clients feel capable of revealing their gold to us, because they feel like this is a place in which their gold will be respected. They feel like it is a place where their gold is safe. And that's where we start to really dig into what's going on. Yeah, thanks, Melanie. It's something that makes real sense to me, because it goes with the coaching idea of that unconditional positive regard. It doesn't mean to say they haven't got a load of white going on too, and so have we. And then we can be more aware of our white and their white. So what else did people come up with? Yeah, Mark.
You just got me reflecting about the appropriateness of me using cafes to see clients. And so I'm kind of thinking on about that now. And yeah, I was saying to my group that I might need to tidy my house up a little bit and invite people around here for some coaching. But yeah, so it was a really good point. So I'm glad it was made. Thank you.
And I think it's a real threshold as a coach, because it also means you're taking yourself more seriously as a coach. You're not somebody who sits in cafes to have a chat with people and ask deep questions where they can only go so far. You're going, I'm really committing to this, so much so that, don't look at my house. I'm prepared to tidy up my house to invite people in, because I'm taking myself seriously, which is, again, trust in your own ability as a coach. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to invest in this. Yeah, brilliant. Hold on, let me check the chat. So who else is prepared to share what they're going to take away and what they're going to do? Sam.
Just wanted to make a kind of broad observation, Hattie, that obviously there's a few of these workshops and everyone's got their own way of interpreting everything. And it was really empowering for you to speak specifically about how we can make these competencies our own. And that indeed, that is the real essence of actually embodying it, rather than seeing it on the website and seeing as a list of things, oh, I have to adhere to these 1A, 1B things. It's no, they're real things. They're things we're already doing, and they're things we can be aware of.
Yeah, Kat and I were actually talking about it when you were off in the Zoom rooms, because people always talked about, when I did law, people would talk about, well, the law is clear and it's straight and it's simple. It's like, no, if the law were clear and straight and simple, you wouldn't need lawyers. We're the ones who argue round the law. And I take a bit more of a barrister approach, but I think that's the way of sort of empowering us to go, these are tools to make us better coaches. They don't run us, we use them. And they are, in my opinion, they're really effective tools. And I wholeheartedly support them. But as Sandy and you say, make them yours. Make them yours. So anything else people would like to say? Yes, Yvonne.
I just wanted to go back to the what we talked about, the power of vulnerability, and not just vulnerability for the sake of being vulnerable for connection, but being authentic with it, so that it empowers our client to feel the same way and to have that humanity, that connection and I think it allows us to be on the same sort of ground as our when we're coaching somebody, because if we strip everything away, we come to understand that they are the expert of their life and they will have all the answers. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I think if we start to use vulnerability as a tool, then we're being disingenuous, aren't we? If we're saying, I'm going to be vulnerable in order for them to, actually it's going, I'm going to lean into my vulnerability to serve them, and understanding that by doing that, it's not a weakness, it's actually an empowerment for them. But as you say, it has to be genuine. Claire.
I was just going to say, when I think about, particularly on social media, like what I resonate with the most is when people are being vulnerable. It's when people are talking about their innermost thoughts and feelings. That's what we want more of, right? So, Brené Brown's a brilliant example, but she talks about her own vulnerability so much, and it makes her so endearing and real. And, so I just think about who I engage with on social media, for example, and it's always the people that are being more vulnerable. So.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And it's also that idea that knowing and owning our vulnerabilities is empowering, because it only matters if it matters to you. And it's like, yes, I feel this way, and that's okay. And that's back to that idea of treating ourselves with kindness. you know, I'm vulnerable. It's a real, as Yvonne said, it's a real and genuine vulnerability. This is something I feel vulnerable about, but it's okay. It's human. It's okay to feel like that. Julia, you've said a reminder about treating your client with unconditional positive regard and creating trust by showing your vulnerability. So your action is naming what's coming up for you in the session and openly sharing it with client if relevant. Yeah, absolutely. So they see you as a partner in the space. And that can take vulnerability in itself. You know, I always talk about leading questions and compound questions as us trying to control our vulnerability, because we do leading questions because we want a certain answer, because we want to know the route. We need to get them to there. So we're going to ask this question, which will get them to here and then to there and then to there. No, that's you being in control of the session. A compound question is, I'm going to ask this question, then I'm going to add a clause to make it this, then I'm going to add a clause to make it this. And just to make sure you know the question I'm going to ask and you give me the right answer, I'm just going to add a final clause. And that's all about us feeling vulnerable about the answers that come back to us. And actually being open and going, I'm just going to ask you this really broad question, knowing and trusting myself that whatever you throw back at me, I'm going to be honest and I'm going to sit with. And even that is, crikey, that wasn't the answer I was expecting. Okay, let's look at that. And that's not a bad thing. It's just like, this is where we're at, or there's something coming up for me and I'm going to share it with you and I could be wrong and that's okay. It could be that it's my shit, not your shit. And as often I say, look, there's something coming up for me. It could be my stuff, not your stuff, but I'm just going to share it with you. Let me know what you think. And being okay that you might be right, you might be wrong, you might be right and they're not ready to accept it, you might be wrong, and it's all okay. So is there anything else that people would like to share about what they're taking away from this session? Well, I wanted to just say thank you for all your contributions and your willingness to share. We have been talking about trust and safety and vulnerability. So I appreciate those of you who've shared, and I hope that you take anything you want from this session, frankly, because that's the point of these sorts of discussions. It's that idea that they stimulate you to think. They empower, just as we want to empower our clients, they empower you to go off and make these your own and use them as tools so that you can feel better, have more trust in yourself, feel safer in your own hands. And so your clients can too. So thank you so much for giving me your time. And I look forward to seeing you somewhere, sometime in the future, hopefully.